How her small voice asking, "Will you be my father?" made me stay against all odds. Asterisk, you're bigger than we thought. That's what Dr. Syra Veltari said, eyes wide, voice just a little breathless as she adjusted the scanner in her trembling hands. She hadn't meant to say it out loud, but it slipped, like many things had begun to slip around Daniel Reeve. The human male was sitting shirtless on the edge of the exam table, muscles relaxed, gaze calm, amused even. He tilted his head, smirking just slightly. Is that a scientific observation, doctor? Or are we already off protocol? Syra swallowed. She was supposed to be the composed one. Cold, logical, clinical. That was what the Zoralan Conclave wanted. That was how xenobiologists operated. You didn't come all this way across star systems to blush over a Terran's physique. But God's, he was different. Human bodies were strange, more rugged, more chaotic, but also compelling. And Daniel Reeve? He was a walking contradiction. War veteran turned medic, full of scar tissue and soft words. His file said emotionally guarded. Her gut said otherwise. She cleared her throat. Skeletal and muscular ratios are well above average. Higher density than expected. Faster regenerative markers. In your endocrine system. She paused, staring at the hormonal data flashing across her handheld. He leaned forward slightly. Voice low. Is that your way of saying, I smell good? No, she said too fast, then caught herself. I mean objectively, your pheromone output is elevated, but not unpleasant. He laughed then. It wasn't mocking, just easy, natural. The kind of laugh that tugged at the corners of her brain in ways she didn't have words for. So, I passed the alien sniff test. That's a relief. Syra turned away and busied herself with her tools, pretending to scan his vitals again. She could still feel the heat creeping up her neck. This was ridiculous. She was a lead scientist. On a classified first contact study, she was here to gather biological data, not get distracted. But Daniel made that difficult. Every day he welcomed her with a smile, offered her tea, told her stories she didn't ask for, but secretly enjoyed. He wasn't afraid of her the way other humans were. And unlike her colleagues, who treated everything as sterile procedure, he treated her like a person, a curious, maybe weird, possibly charming person. Why did you volunteer for this? He asked that day, as she pretended to be focused on his blood pressure again. Your people don't seem like the live in a hut on Earth type. She didn't answer at first. Then softly, I wanted to know why your species is so... noisy. Noisy? Your biology, your emotions, your reactions. All so loud, messy, alive. Most Zoralan processes are automated now. Breeding is assigned by compatibility charts. We pair for genetics, not feelings. Sounds romantic, Daniel said with a dry smile. It isn't, she replied. Which is why I volunteered. I wanted to see what we lost, what we forgot. He nodded thoughtfully. So what do you think now that you've seen us up close? She hesitated, then said, I think. Might not want to go back. That stopped him. His eyes met hers, steady, serious. The air between them shifted. You're not supposed to say that, he said. I know. There was silence for a long beat. Outside the small outpost, the wind howled across the empty plains. Inside, it was just them. No other conclave staff, no sterile walls, just a Terran medic with a crooked grin and a Zoralan. Biologist who was beginning to question every protocol she'd ever followed. You're different, she said suddenly. Even your reproductive anatomy, it's not just function. It's expression, connection, your people. Care during it, not just before or after. He raised an eyebrow. You've been reading our dating guides again? I read everything, she said, but it's not the same as experiencing. Daniel's smirk faded into something more gentle. You're saying you want to experience? She didn't answer with words. She stepped closer instead, still holding her scanner, but no longer pretending to look at it. Not as a specimen, but as something far more dangerous, a man she might not want to leave behind. I've never touched someone for pleasure, she admitted. In our culture, that's not what touching is for. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers brushed. It was small, soft, but for her, it felt like falling off a cliff and finding out halfway down she had wings. He didn't rush her, didn't joke this time, just held her hand. Quietly. Then let's take it slow, he said. No charts, no scans, just ... see where this goes. She nodded. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. For science, she said. He chuckled. Sure, for science. And just like that, the mission changed. It had been 4 days since Syra Veltari touched a human hand for the first time. For days since she crossed the line between observation and something else, she tried to rationalize it, reframe it, categorize it. But no matter how she turned it over in her mind, it didn't fit into any approved data set. The conclave would say she'd been compromised. She preferred to think of it as enlightened. Daniel had stopped treating her like a visiting scientist. It's not out of disrespect, but because they were. More now, not officially, not spoken. But every glance, every shared silence, every moment. She forgot to breathe when he looked at her. It was all there. On the 5th morning, Syra woke not to alarms or data syncs, but to the smell of freshly brewed earth coffee. Daniel stood at the small cooking unit, stirring something thick and brown in a battered metal pot. He wore nothing but pants and a smug half-smile. You're staring, he said without turning. You're aesthetically pleasing, she replied, voice still groggy from sleep. You mean handsome? No. I mean biologically proportional and visually stimulating. It's a scientific statement. He handed her a mug. Then take your stimulant, doctor. You've got a long day of observing. Syra accepted the mug, but didn't drink. Instead, she leaned against the wall, watching him move, fascinated by how casual his strength was. Zoralan males were lean, light-boned, symmetrical. Daniel was solid, scarred, and built like someone who'd survived things most couldn't even imagine. Tell me, she asked after a long pause, why don't humans regulate pairing by genetic suitability? Turned, eyebrow raised. You mean, why don't we treat love like a spreadsheet? Yes, he sipped his own drink. Because love isn't about efficiency, it's about connection. It's about finding someone who makes your life louder. She blinked. That sounds inefficient. It is. And it's beautiful. He paused, watching her. You think too much, Syra. Not everything's a test. Her face twitched. That's because I keep failing the ones that matter. He set his mug down, walked to her, gently took the cup from her hand. Then let's take the next one together. She looked up at him, studied him. I don't know how to be with someone. Not really. Our kind doesn't do bonding, we mate. For function. And how's that been working out for you? She let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. We're dying out. Daniel took her hand again, just as he had that first night. This time she didn't just stand there. Frozen, she stepped into him. Her head rested against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, strong. That sound, she whispered, it's loud. Yeah, that's what it means to be human. We feel loudly. For the next several days, the routine changed. Their scientific sessions were still logged, at least officially. But Daniel noticed how often the scanner mysteriously malfunctioned. When Syra needed an excuse to stay longer, she started asking different kinds of questions. Right. You keep all those old paper books? Why do you hum when you cook? Why do humans kiss? That last one had been asked with her face barely inches from his, breath uneven. You really want a verbal explanation? He murmured, I want to understand the purpose. He smiled. Purpose. Same as your research. Discovery. And he kissed her. Not because it was expected or logical, but because it was true. Her hands clutched at his shoulders, not for data, but for feeling. And when they pulled apart, she didn't say anything. Didn't need to. She just whispered, I think I'm beginning to understand. That night, she stayed. There was only one bed again. Only this time they didn't pretend to need distance. Their bodies fit awkwardly at first, different sizes. Different rhythms, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the warmth, the closeness. The way she pressed her forehead to his and said, in my culture, this would be considered irreversible. He looked at her. And do you want to reverse it? She shook her head. No, I want to. Mate, the word hit the air like a dropped stone, heavy. Real. Daniel grinned, brushing a strand of silver hair behind her ear. You're not great at romance, are you? I'm adapting. That night they didn't rush. She was nervous, but curious. And he was patient, almost reverent. As their bodies joined, she gasped not from pain, but surprise. You're larger than our males, she whispered, eyes wide, voice full of wonder. It's not just size. It's heat, depth. It fills things we don't have words for. He smiled. We're a very expressive species. I've noticed, she breathed. They moved slowly, exploring each other not as data, but as discovery. Afterwards, they lay still. No charts, no analysis. Just heartbeats and quiet breath. Syra blinked at the ceiling. If my people knew what I just did, I'd be recalled, reassigned, possibly sterilized. He pulled her closer. Then maybe it's time you stopped being one of them. Syra didn't answer, but the way she curled into his side said everything. And outside, beneath the stars, the wind carried the first true silence she'd known in years. Not because the world was quiet, but because for the first time, she was exactly where she wanted to be. Syra Veltari didn't sleep much that night.
Not because she was restless,
But because her mind had finally gone quiet, wrapped against Daniel's bare chest, her fingers resting in the scattered hair above his heart, she simply listened to the rhythm of him.
the rise and fall of his breathing.
The warmth that radiated from his body like he carried a private sun beneath his skin. Zoralan males were colder, lighter, efficient, but distant. She remembered the few clinical pairings she had endured during reproductive selection trials. Nothing was personal, nothing was intimate. It was about exchange, not connection. The males rarely made eye contact. Afterward, there were no words, just scans and evaluations, but Daniel. He had kissed her shoulder after, not because he had to, not because he wanted to. That single touch had hit her harder than any scan, any test, any theory she'd ever trusted. She tilted her head up and whispered, "How can your kind live with this much feeling?" Daniel opened one eye, a lazy smile curling at the edge of his lips. "We drink, we write music. Sometimes we break things." She blinked. "Is that a joke or a diagnosis?" "A bit of both," he said, pulling her gently closer. "Why? Feeling too much already?" "I'm trying not to," she admitted. He kissed the top of her head and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then quietly, "Why?" "Because if I feel, I might not go back." He didn't ask where. He didn't need to. She was already drifting away from everything she'd ever known. When morning came, she dressed slowly, her conclave uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too sterile. Daniel had already gone outside to tend to the soil units, the solar relays, the half-broken water recycler that had been threatening to short out for a week. Syra watched him from the doorway, shirtless again, arms flexing as he lifted heavy crates like they were nothing. She blinked. Humans were not designed to be this strong, not just physically but emotionally. It unsettled her, fascinated. Later that day, her cum unit chirped. A pulse from the Zoralan science vessel, still in orbit. Routine check-in. A reminder. Cold digital text. Status update required. Turn window approaching. Research logs pending? Syra stared at the message for a full minute before shutting it. Oh, she didn't answer. Not yet, Daniel noticed. Of course he did. That evening, as they sat by the edge of the hydro garden, legs dangling over the platform, he handed her a cup of something warm and bitter. "They checking in?" She nodded. "They want logs. Data. Updates. I'm going to send them the part where you straddled me and muttered about deep cellular compatibility." Her cheeks darkened instantly. "That was a serious observation." He grinned. "Oh, I took it seriously." She nudged him with her elbow, but didn't deny it. Instead, she asked, "Do you ever wonder why you're so different from the rest of your species?" Daniel looked out over the darkened plains. Sure. I've been wondering that since I was a kid, and I think we all want to be different. But just most people are scared to live like it. He paused. But you? You don't strike me as someone who likes being told what she should be. Syra was silent. Then softly, you're right. I never did. But I also never found a reason to fight back. And now. She looked at him, this human with his rough hands and soft heart, and whispered, now I have one. The days that followed blurred together. Her research logs became less clinical, less distant. Her scans focused more on the human endocrine systems, specifically Daniel's. She ran daily blood tests, logged shifts in mood, tracked heart rate responses. She told herself it was science, saint. She was falling hard, quietly, completely, and Daniel, for all his teasing and smirks, never pushed, never demanded. He let her come to him when she was ready, how she wanted. One night she asked to see his scars. Not just the surface ones, but the ones beneath. He sat on the edge of the bed, shirtless, his back to her. Slowly he explained each one. A wound from an IED, a burn from a reactor breach, a jagged slice along his ribs from saving a civilian. During a riot on Ganymede, Syra reached out, running her fingertips over each mark. Your body tells a story. So does yours, he said without turning. You just hide it better. I don't know how to be open, she admitted. Where I'm from, openness is weakness. He turned to face her, took her hands in his. Where I'm from, it's the only way to survive. She held his gaze, and this time it was her. Who kissed him first? This time she didn't hesitate. This time she wasn't just studying. She was choosing, and deep inside she knew every report she didn't send, every message she ignored. Every minute she spent wrapped in his arms was a step further from her old life, from her people, from the conclave, but she didn't care, because for the first time in her life she wasn't following a code or a command. Messi was following, feeling, loud, messy, irreversible, human, and she never wanted to go back. Asterisk, the sky above the outpost darkened to full hours before nightfall. A low, humming tone vibrated in the ground, subtle, but unmistakable to Syra. She stood still in the middle of the garden module, one gloved hand clenching around a vine of Terran tomatoes, her breath caught in her throat. It was the sound of a Zoralan shuttle breaking orbit. It wasn't coming in quietly. Inside the living quarters, Daniel heard it too. He stepped out onto the main deck, wiping grease from his fingers, eyes narrowing as he scanned the distant clouds. That sound normal for your people? He asked. Syra didn't look at him. Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where the clouds glowed faint violet from the shuttle's underbelly thrusters. No, she said quietly. That's a tactical landing vector. Daniel's jaw tightened. They're not here to pick up soil samples, are they? She didn't answer. By nightfall, the ship had landed less than 3 kilometers away. Sleek, silver, and silent now. Zorlan retrieval vessels were rarely seen by outsiders, certainly not by colonials living off the grid like Daniel, but Syra knew what was coming, knew the protocol. You'll be taken back for neural review, she murmured aloud that night, pacing the tiny living space as Daniel watched from the corner. They'll purge emotional contaminants, reassign my designations, my data, my body. Everything goes back into the collective cycle. Daniel leaned forward. They're not taking you. She stopped pacing, looked at him. You don't understand. I'm conclave bonded. My genetic key is marked. If I resist, they'll mark me defective. That's a euthanize order. He stood now, crossing to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. You're not defective. You're just awake. She stared at him, her breath catching. I won't let them take you, he said. If they try, they'll find out exactly what a primitive human is capable of. Syra felt a tremble pass through her, not from fear, but something deeper, something protective, something she'd never known before. Not from her kind, not from anyone. Daniel wasn't strong because he was built that way. He was strong because he chose to be, again and again, even when it hurt. Later that night, Syra did something Zoralan protocol would have classified as an emotional deviation of high concern. She climbed into bed beside Daniel, curled into him like he was gravity itself, and whispered, "If I don't survive this, remember me as someone who tried." He turned to her, eyes steady. "No," he said. "I'll remember you as someone who changed everything." The next morning, the Conclave retrieval officer arrived, lone but carrying enough tech to disassemble the outpost in under an hour. Her name was Overseer Vale. All polished chrome implants and dead eyes. "Dr. Veltari," she intoned with icy calm. "Your research term is concluded. You will return to ship for reintegration." Syra stood with her hands at her sides, shoulders straight. "I refuse." Vale tilted her head, one cybernetic eye flashing faint blue. "Your refusal is noted. It does not alter the mandate." Daniel stepped forward, jaw set. "She's not going with you." Vale's gaze slid to him. "Ah, the specimen." Daniel corrected. "Her partner." "You're a contamination vector," Vale said, tone flat.
Ow.
"This entire site will be sterilized once retrieval is complete." "You can try," Daniel replied. Syra's hand slipped into his. It was a simple motion, but to Vale, it was all the confirmation she needed. "This connection has corrupted her," Vale said. "You've compromised Conclave data integrity. You comprehend the consequences?" Daniel's expression didn't flinch. "Lady, I don't even comprehend half the words you're using. I do know this: she's not your property." The air turned cold. Vale reached to activate her recall module, but Syra moved faster. Faster than a Zoralon was trained to. Her hand flashed toward her own databand and ripped it free. The implant sparked. She cried out, but didn't fall. She stood, trembling, holding the smoldering device in her palm. "I reject designation," she said through gritted teeth. "I reject the Conclave. I claim free status under planetary sovereignty." Vale stared. No emotion, just recalculating. "Then your body will be archived for damage assessment." That was when Daniel moved fast, brutal, efficient, in one motion. He slammed Vale's recall module to the ground and crushed it under his boot. Sparks flew. The retrieval signal died. Vale swung sharp and quick with her enhanced limbs. But Daniel caught her, twisted, dropped her. The Overseer lay still. Syra stared, stunned. Not at the violence, but at how calm he was afterward. Not angry, not boastful, just present. He knelt beside her. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, then blinked at him. "You just assaulted a high-ranking Conclave officer." "Old-fashioned," he said. "When someone tries to take what I love, I hit back." Her heart stuttered. "You love?" Looked at her dead serious. "Of course I do. You think I let just anyone scan my endocrine system 4 times a day?" She laughed a little too loudly, a little too shakily, and pulled him into a kiss that left no room for science. They burned. The recall beacon that night buried the broken implant in the garden, under the tomato vines. The shuttle would leave without Vale, without Syra, without answers, and far above the clouds. On a ship that still thought she was one of them, an empty chair at the lab console quietly filed itself as abandoned. But Syra wasn't lost. She was found. Found in a broken Terran outpost. Beside a man who saw her not as a data point or a reproductive tool, but as a woman who had finally made her own choice, and she had chosen him. The Conclave never came back. Whether they deemed the mission a loss or wrote Syra off as defective beyond recovery, she didn't know. Didn't care. What mattered was that the sky remained quiet, that her name was no longer filed under genetic asset. When she woke up each morning, the only data she needed was the steady warmth of Daniel's body beside hers. And then one day, everything changed again. It started small, a mist cycle, a strange fatigue. Syra assumed it was stress, or perhaps an immune response from being off stabilizers too long. But deep down, her mind whispered another possibility. She ran the scan 3 times. Before she believed it, Zoralon females weren't supposed to be compatible with humans. Cross-species gestation was biologically improbable, even under controlled lab conditions. The Conclave had tested the possibility, rejected it, declared it a dead end. And yet, The screen blinked softly. Hybrid gestation confirmed. Primary development. Stage. Viability. 87%. Syra stared at the glowing data. Her breath hitched. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She didn't feel fear. She felt alive. Daniel found her outside, standing barefoot in the soil garden, arms wrapped around herself, just staring up at the sky. Her silver hair whipped in the wind like a flag torn. Free from its pole, he came up beside her, not saying a word at first. Then, gently, "What's wrong?" She turned to him, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Something different inside me." He stiffened. "Different how? Are you hurt?" "No," she said quickly. Then softer, "I'm pregnant." He blinked, stared at her, then blinked again. "You're... what?" Her mouth twitched. "I think that's your fault." He ran a hand through his hair. "I mean, I knew humans were adaptable, but this feels like breaking a few universal laws. It shouldn't be possible," she admitted. "Not with our biology. But somehow, we made something that is..." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then Daniel stepped forward, placed a hand on her abdomen still flat, still unchanged, and whispered, "You sure it's real?" "Yes." "You scared?" "Yes." He looked into her eyes. "Do you want to keep it?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." Long and slow, then leaned in and kissed her. Not with passion, but with something deeper, grounded, solid, unshakable. Then he pulled back and said, "Okay then, we're gonna do this." Together she laughed, a nervous, choked sound. "You're handling this better than I expected. I was a combat medic, Syra. I once delivered twins in the middle of a Martian sandstorm with nothing but a bent scalpel and half a water bottle." He smiled. This is just life getting interesting." And it did get interesting. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustments. Syra's body began to change. Subtly at first core, temperature fluctuations, hormone imbalances, heightened sensitivity to sound and light. Her physiology didn't know how to be pregnant with a half-human child, but it was doing its best. Daniel built a makeshift medical scanner using parts from an old salvage drone and 3 pieces of kitchen equipment. It worked barely, but it was enough to monitor vitals. When they first saw the flickering pulse of the baby's heartbeat on the screen, Syra stared at it for nearly 5 minutes without speaking. Daniel rested his hand on her back and said, "That little heartbeat is already stronger than most people I've known." "It's not just strength," she murmured. "It's defiance. It's evolution." Sounds like its mother. Their days became routine, as routine as life on a backwater frontier outpost could be. Daniel adjusted the solar panels so they could run the hydroponic system 24 hours a day. Syra started growing Terran root hybrids to supplement her shifting nutrient needs. She developed strange cravings. Earth cinnamon bark, mixed with fermented Zorlon root paste. Daniel nearly gagged when he tried it. "You are officially the weirdest pregnant woman I've ever met," he said, nose wrinkling. "And you've only met one," she reminded him with a smirk. They laughed often, kissed often. Twin. Daniel insisted on reinforcing the compound in case another chrome-faced conclave goon showed up. Syra argued it was unnecessary. He said he didn't care. "If anyone tries to take you again," he growled one night, "they're going to find out that humans aren't just emotional or territorial." She liked that. She liked him. But not everything was peaceful. One night, she woke in pain, curling around herself, breath short, skin clammy. Daniel was up in seconds, scanning her with his patched-together equipment, muttering curses under his breath. "Heartbeat's still strong," he said, "but you're burning up." "It's the internal adaptation," she groaned. "My immune system, it's trying to reject part of the embryo. Doesn't know how to accept the human." Daniel's face hardened. "Then we train it. We make it accept it." And somehow they did. Through carefully balanced nutrition, stress reduction, and maybe, just maybe, the power of her will, Syra's body stopped fighting itself. The pain eased. The embryo stabilized. And one morning, Syra looked into the mirror and realized she didn't see a conclave scientist anymore. She saw a mother. When Daniel entered, carrying a tray of that weird cinnamon root tea, She met his eyes and said, "She's going to need a name." She? Cyrus smiled faintly. "I feel it." Daniel nodded. "And we'd better pick a good one. Something strong. Something that doesn't sound like a starship." Syra laughed. "Deal." "Ass!" They sat together on the edge of the bed. Palms resting on her gently rounded belly. The sun rose slowly over the outpost, casting gold light across to people who never should have met, never should have been able to love, never should have been able to create life. And yet, here they were. An alien. A heartbeat between them. Proof that love didn't need permission from biology. It only needed a reason. The child was born under the twin moons of Sector 12 Theta, in a structure never meant to be a home, a converted aid station, single bed, living unit with hand-patched solar lines and a medical scanner. Held together with scrap wire and prayer, but to Syra Veltari and Daniel Reeve, it was everything. And that night, it became something more, a cradle for the impossible. Syra didn't scream when the labor pains came. Zorlon women didn't scream, even if every nerve was lit like plasma fire. Her people were trained for silence, for discipline, for clinical reproductive duty. But this wasn't duty. This was her choice. And Daniel? He was there the whole time. One hand gripping hers, the other carefully adjusting the birthing equipment that flickered with low battery warnings every 15 minutes. "Just breathe," he told her. "I've got you." "I am breathing," she snapped between clenched teeth. "You breathe through this." He smirked. "She gets her temper from you." Syra shot him a look that could have fried circuitry. 4 hours later it happened. The sharp intake of breath, the final push. And then silence, not from fear, but from awe. The child didn't cry at first. She blinked, bright silver eyes looking around the room as if studying it. Syra stared, breathless, as the infant was placed against her chest, still slick with the fluids of life, but perfect in every way that mattered. "She's warm," Syra whispered. Daniel leaned in, touching the tiny fingers that curled instinctively. Around his thumb? "She's real." He named her Alice. A word from an old Earth dialect meaning light between storms. And for the first time in either of their lives, they didn't feel alone. But word travels faster than truth in the outer systems. 2 weeks after Elise's birth, a stolen fragment of medical data flagged a forgotten beacon on the edge of the Sind. Zoralan-controlled star charts, a silent ping, simple bio-reading. But it was enough. A conclave science vessel intercepted the signal. One of the lower officers reviewed the DNA sample out of boredom. When he saw it when the scan confirmed Zoralan and human genetic fusion, he dropped his ration bar and filed a high-priority escalation report in less than 12 hours. The Conclave High Genetic Council received the first documented proof of an interspecies viable child. Not a clone. It's not a forced fusion. It's not a sterile hybrid. A living, breathing, naturally born child. And suddenly, Syra Veltari was no longer marked as missing. She was marked essential. On the frontier, she had no idea what was coming. But Daniel. He sensed it. He was on the roof, reinforcing the antenna mounts when the message came in on their encrypted receiver. Her voice, not a conclave one. Human. Military. Familiar. "Reeve. This is Captain Mira Langston of the Terran Xenoprotection Bureau. We have intercepted communications from the Zorlan Conclave. They are aware of your child. Your outpost is compromised. We are offering protection. You'll need to decide fast." Daniel didn't hesitate. "How fast? You've got 5 days tops?" Daniel climbed down and told Syra everything. She sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Alice in her arms, rocking gently. "They'll want to take her," Syra said. Eyes locked on the child, study her, dissect the connection. "If they see her as a breakthrough, they'll treat her like a test tube." "Then we don't let them see her at all," Daniel said. "We move. Disappear. I have contacts people who owe me favors. I was part of their science fleet," she whispered. "They'll track me by thought patterns if they have to." Daniel knelt in front of her. Then we changed the pattern. Over the next 3 days, they dismantled everything. Daniel packed. Supplies like a soldier preparing for war. Water recyclers, power cells, medical stock, and half of the hydroponic crop. Axera worked in silence, rigging the old mining transport he'd kept buried under the compound. She modified its heat signature to match local wildlife, changed its transponder code. Alice didn't cry. She rarely did. She watched, alert, present, and when she did cry, it was soft, like a question, not a demand. On the morning of the 5th day, Daniel stood at the edge of the compound, staring at the horizon. The sky was quiet, but he didn't trust it. He turned. As Syra approached, holding Alice wrapped in an old flight jacket. "She doesn't belong to the Conclave," she said softly. "She belongs to no one," Daniel replied, "except us." And then came the moment that told Daniel just how much had changed. Syra looked up at him, voice steady. "Do you still want this?" He blinked. "Want what? This life? A child? A fugitive mate? A broken home? And a future no one can promise." Daniel stepped closer, kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "You and her? You're the only future I've ever been sure of." They left that night, just the three of them. A man who once walked away from war, a woman who once believed love was a distraction, a child who never should have been but now might be the most important life in the galaxy. Behind them, the outpost fell silent, overgrown, forgotten. But somewhere deep in the void, a scientist on the Zorlon Council whispered, "The hybrid lives," and the chase began. Asterisk, they named the place New Solus not because it was peaceful, but because it had the potential to be. A hidden colony on the edge of charted space, buried deep within the gravitational folds of a binary dead zone where signals vanished and trackers failed. It had been an old mining hub once, long abandoned, then quietly revived by Exteron military families, off-grid settlers, and people with complicated pasts who needed to disappear. Daniel, Syra, and Alice arrived under forged ID codes and a weather-beaten transport that wheezed with every landing gear extension. But no one asked questions. Not here. Not when you carried a baby and eyes that said, "We've run far enough." Their new home was a reinforced dome, halfway buried in ash-colored soil and ringed with solar coils scavenged from a dozen worlds. It didn't look like much, but to Syra, who had once lived in a glass tower filled with white walls and hollow words, it felt like freedom. To Daniel, it felt like something else entirely. Foundation, the first months were hard. Alice grew fast. By 6 weeks, she was walking. By 10, speaking in full, clear words in both Terran Common and Zoralan High lexicon. She asked questions. With frightening precision, why does gravity press harder here than it did on the station? Why does mother's blood glow, but father's doesn't? Why do other children blink more than I do? And one night, just after her first birthday, she walked out into the cold, barefoot and fearless, pointed at the stars and said, "They're still looking for me." Daniel and Syra froze. "How do you know that, baby?" Daniel asked, crouching down. She looked at him, eyes luminous, unblinking, "Because I heard them." In her dreams, she explained later, she saw images, heard signals, thought patterns, not words, but shapes and sounds that formed meaning. Messages she couldn't have known. Frequencies she should not have accessed. "She's sinking," Syra whispered in the quiet after. "It's not just genetically, cognitively. She's tuning herself to both networks, human and Zorlon." "Is that good?" Daniel asked. "It's unprecedented," Syra said. "We didn't just make a child. We made a bridge. And bridges attract attention." Alice began doing things no child should be able to do. Small things at first, predicting whether it changes down to the hour, fixing one of Daniel's old transmitters by sight, calming a neighbor's violent dog with a single glance. Word spread. Carefully, quietly. New Solace had no central government, but it had guardians. Former captains, old smugglers, and one medic who now served as the de facto protector of the colony. Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before someone talked too loud, bragged too much, let the wrong signal out into the void. So when the black ship came sleek, Silent and unmarked, they were ready. Daniel stood at the landing field, rifle slung low. Syra stood beside him, one hand on Elis's shoulder, the other gripping a signal jammer. The ship lowered its ramp with a hiss. One figure emerged. It wasn't Zor Allen. It wasn't Tior, A.N. It was something new, tall, draped in a cloak of reflective mesh, face partially hidden. But the voice that spoke was calm, purposeful. I am not here to take. I am here to ask. Daniel's hand tightened around the rifle. Ask what? The being looked at Alice, then back at Syra. What do you intend to do with her? Syra straightened. Raise her. She is the first of her kind. She is our daughter. The being nodded precisely. That's why we're not here to remove her. We are here to observe, quietly at a distance. Daniel's jaw tightened. And if we say no? The being didn't threaten, didn't posture. We are not the Conclave, nor the Terran Accord. We are others. Watching from outside, waiting and now hoping. Because if this child survives, if she thrives, then perhaps the future doesn't have to belong to war and division. Daniel exchanged a long glance with Syra, then looked down at Alice, who stared up at the strange visitor and simply said, "You feel ... sad." The figure stepped back, almost startled, then slowly bowed its head. She is already listening. Without another word, the ship left. No tracking, no warning. Just a whisper on the wind. Months passed, then years, and Alice kept growing. Not just smarter, but wider. Her mind stretched into things even Syra couldn't track. Her drawings became equations. Her dreams, predictions. Began tutoring the children of the colony at 3 years old. At 5, she corrected one of Syra's genome models with casual accuracy. At 6, she asked Daniel, "Do you think they'll ever stop fearing things they don't understand?" He smiled sadly. "Maybe, but if they don't teach them how." The night she turned 7, she built a transmitter from scrap metal and bone-dry wires, powered it with a single solar burst, and sent a pulse into deep space. "What did you say?" Syra asked, once the hum stopped. Alice looked at both her parents and replied, "I said, I'm not a weapon. I'm a beginning." Daniel knelt, pulled her into his arms. "That's all we ever wanted you to be." Years later, when the first treaty between the Zorlan Conclave and the Terran Accord was signed, it was done not in a boardroom but in a quiet dome on New Solace, where a young girl with silver eyes stood between two ambassadors and told them, "You were both wrong about each other. I am proof." Tira stood beside her, no longer the Conclave scientist, no longer anyone's subject. Daniel stood on the other side, his arm around Cyrus's waist, and behind them, a small garden bloomed. Tomatoes, Zorlan root blossoms. A single tree with bark that shimmered in 2 colors at once. A sign, someone said. That peace was no longer a theory. It had grown roots, because a human man chose love over running, because a Zorlan woman chose freedom over obedience, and because the child they made together chose everything, not fear, not anger, everything. And in the quiet glow of sunset, when Alice reached out and took both of their hands, the galaxy tilted just slightly on its axis and finally began to heal. The end.